Los Angeles landscape and context. Los Angeles, a sprawling metropolis on the west coast of the United States, was where this dramatic and haunting story unfolded. The year was 2013, and the city buzzed with its unique blend of glitz, gritty diversity, opportunity, and contradiction. The story centered specifically in a picturesque and affluent residential neighborhood, situated west of downtown and right on the seams where city glass towers began to give way to old-money mansions and trendy new suburban compounds. This area, originally a patchwork of post-war industrial tracts and blue-collar homes in the mid-20th century, had since transformed. By the early 2010s, it had become a locus for young professionals chasing the tech and entertainment dreams, retirees resting in sunshine luxury, and old families whose roots ran deep in Los Angeles history. Palms lined the pristine streets, and jacaranda trees splashed violet across springtime avenues. Cafes, vegan bakeries, and upscale grocery stores were just blocks away from elegant homes guarded by manicured hedges and proudly flown American flags. The contrasts within Los Angeles were palpable, never far beneath the sunlit surface. Luxury condos and gated streets coexisted, sometimes tensely, alongside pockets of stubborn poverty. This particular community, however, enjoyed a rare oasis of quiet. Residents, mostly upper-middle class or wealthier, took pride in their neighborhood's unhurried mornings, weekly farmers markets, PTA meetings, and block parties. The feeling of safety and calm was part of what drew people here. It was easy to believe that nothing truly dark could invade their picture-perfect suburban peace. But of course, New World optimism can conceal Old World tensions and secrets. Many people in this district, from second-generation Hollywood producers to retired aerospace engineers, from local business owners to young startup founders, bore their own burdens of family expectation, unspoken grudges, and the ever-present pressure to maintain appearances. The Smith family, central to this tale, blended beautifully and almost invisibly into such an environment, successful, social, outwardly content. Yet the mystery that struck them would prove how beneath the palm-shaded tranquility, even the most polished American dreams can fracture. Los Angeles's sprawling avenues and anonymous crowds, its culture of ambition and reinvention, would become both setting and silent witness to a tragedy that would shake this community's faith in appearances, stepping into the shadows cast by its own golden California sun. Main family, the Smiths. The central family in this story, the Smiths, exemplifies a layered portrait of American suburban life. David and Linda Smith, both in their early 60s, have called Los Angeles their home for decades. Their marriage stretches back to their college days at Berkeley, a partnership built on mutual respect, a zest for life, and shared ambition. David, once an aerospace engineer involved in California's defense boom, now invests his time in civic boards and tending roses in their acclaimed garden. Linda, a former art teacher, fills her days with local theater productions and watercolor classes she hosts for neighborhood retirees. They live in a stately, sun-warmed Spanish revival on an elm-shaded avenue, a house that's seen decades of holiday gatherings, birthdays, triumphs, and family quarrels. On their walls hang photos of trips to Tuscany and Paris, Mark's college baseball championship, and Christmas mornings with a sea of unwrapped toys and the family golden retriever smiling in the center. Their house is, in many ways, the reliquary of American aspirations, a testament to years of sacrifice, luck, and quietly accumulating investments, especially their growing property portfolio, which allows for a comfortable, semi-retired lifestyle. The couple has two sons. Mark, the eldest, is a successful financial advisor, disciplined and almost compulsively driven. He lives with his wife and two young daughters in a nearby suburb, dutifully attending Sunday lunches and maintaining the image of the golden child, the one who followed the rules and met expectations. Kevin, 5 years Mark's junior, is markedly different, imaginative yet restless, more comfortable as a freelance digital artist than tied to any corporate grind. His relationship with his parents, especially his father, has been laced with tension. Kevin still lives in Los Angeles, but in a bohemian studio apartment, drifting through art collectives and indie film projects, often showing up late to family dinners, his presence both a source of worry and hope for David and Linda. Beneath their family successes and immaculate lawn, the Smiths share unspoken burdens, rivalries simmering between brothers, parental anxieties left unsaid, and the silent weight of expectations nurtured in the suburbs. Friends describe the Smiths as everything a family should be, loving, open, and generous with both time and resources. They throw legendary block parties and donate lavishly to local charities. But as their tight-knit community learns, Even the most ideal families can hide fissures just out of view. For the Smiths, the equilibrium between tradition and reinvention, pride and vulnerability, sits at the fragile core of their American dream. Unexpected event, on March 6, 2013 March 6, 2013, dawned in Los Angeles like any other bright post-rain Wednesday. Sunlight dappling the palm fronds and jacarandas, grocery store trucks making their rounds, parents hustling children to school, retirees walking golden retrievers. But in the picturesque avenue where the Smith family lived, the normalcy unraveled with a single phone call that would upend countless lives. Earlier that morning, Mark Smith was on his way to work, a financial analyst's usual routine of emails and morning radio, when he received a terse, unanswered phone call from the landline at his parents' home. Thinking nothing of it, Mark dismissed it as a typical mistake, perhaps his father fiddling with the phone while pruning roses in the back garden. Meanwhile, Kevin Smith, Mark's younger brother, woke late after a late-night editing session for an independent film project. He idly scrolled through text messages and noticed a missed call from his mother, left around 7:15 a.m. The message was strangely fragmented, a soft sigh, a rustle of static, then nothing. Typically, the Smiths were models of routine. David and Linda took a morning walk each day, often stopping at the same cafe for coffee and lemon scones. Linda would chat with neighbors or plan her next watercolor class, and David attended to their garden, the envy of the street. The family had a group chat, full of reminders, loving quips, and calendar notes about birthdays and Sunday meals. But that morning, neither brother could get a response to their texts. By noon, the silence grew oppressive. Calls to the house phone chimed out. Both brothers, mildly worried but not panicked, compared notes. Neither parent had replied to messages or been seen at their usual haunts. Mark tried reaching close family friends, whose texts returned the same answer. "No, we haven't seen your folks today. Is everything all right?" As the day wore on, unease turned into dread. The Smiths' neighbors began to notice the lack of routine. Linda's absence at the market, David's porch untended. Mark called the bank where his father regularly attended board meetings. They confirmed Mr. Smith hadn't shown up, with no explanation. Kevin checked with the local police dispatch just in case there had been an accident, but there were no records matching their parents' names or vehicle. By 4 p.m., Mark and Kevin, now frantic, met at their parents' house. The doors were locked from the inside, and the family golden retriever was whining at the window, hungry, but otherwise unharmed. Inside, nothing seemed obviously wrong at first glance. Breakfast dishes in the sink, beds made, Linda's purse on the hallway table, David's keys in their usual dish. But both cell phones, Linda's and David's, were found plugged into their chargers in the bedroom. The home's security alarm had not been triggered. They checked the backyard and the garage, scanning for signs of sudden departure or forced entry. Kevin found the family calendar, still open to the prior weekend's block party plans. Nothing written for March 6th but the word garden scrawled in Linda's quick cursive. The brothers' growing anxiety burst into urgency as the evening came. Mark placed a call to the neighborhood watch liaison, who suggested alerting the Los Angeles Police Department to file a missing persons report immediately. The officers who responded initially treated the situation as a routine welfare check, given the Smiths' established responsible presence. But the combination of abandoned phones, the untouched breakfast, and the sudden radio silence from a couple known for their reliability made the situation escalate rapidly. As news of the Smiths' perplexing absence started to ripple through their street, whispered among neighbors, posted in local Facebook groups, texted to family and friends, a hush seemed to settle over their section of Los Angeles. The sense of safety that had always felt as much a part of the neighborhood as the palms overhead now seemed illusory. For the Smith sons, March 6th became a painful dividing line. Before, when everything worked as it should, and after, when nothing would ever feel quite predictable or safe again. Police report and a desperate search March 7, 2013, would prove a defining moment for the Smith family, and for the entire community. That morning, after a sleepless night and endless calling with no answer, Mark and Kevin Smith made the difficult decision to report their parents missing to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Both brothers arrived at the station with haggard eyes, clutching personal items, a favorite family photo, Linda's well-worn address book, evidence of their parents' established roots and habits they so desperately hoped would aid the search. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit confines of the police station, the air was thick with anxiety. Mark, composed but visibly trembling, recounted a play-by-play of the last few days to a young officer with a notepad at the ready. Kevin hovered behind, his hands twisting the strap of his backpack, occasionally adding details: what their parents wore last, who they'd planned to see, routines never altered for years. The report included David and Linda's physical descriptions, daily schedules, favorite places in the neighborhood, and most important, their utter lack of reason to voluntarily disappear. As procedure dictated, the sheriff's office immediately dispatched a standard missing persons alert. Patrol cars canvassed the family's residential block, knocking on neighbors' doors to gather statements. The community's tranquil veneer had already begun to show cracks. Concerned neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering encouragements and sharing leads, some providing security cam footage while others went door-to-door checking garages, guest houses, and alleys. The Smith brothers split up to spearhead separate efforts. Mark started pouring through digital records, email inboxes, phone bills, even home surveillance footage for subtle clues. Kevin hit the pavement, distributing flyers at local grocery stores, cafes, and church bulletin boards, attaching a carefully cropped image from their last family holiday. Their extended family, alerted by a storm of group texts, spread the message through social media networks. By the second day, the investigation had broadened. Local news picked up the story, amplifying the gravity of the Smiths' disappearance, and soon reporters clustered outside the family home with camera crews hopeful to capture updates. Tips began trickling in from all corners of Los Angeles County: supposed sightings in parks, a couple matching the Smiths' appearance at a bus stop, a call about a car similar to David's found idling in a shopping center lot. Each potential break brought momentary hope but ultimately led nowhere. Meanwhile, the Smiths' inner circle grew increasingly exhausted, from coordinating searches with Neighborhood Watch to combing over every inch of the home, calling area hospitals and hotels, even contacting rideshare companies on the off chance their parents had left without warning. Every evening, both Mark and Kevin met in their parents' kitchen, piecing timelines together by sticky notes and empty coffee cups, their voices sometimes trailing off as each brother was overtaken by silent dread. There was a growing sense of helplessness, but also a stubborn determination. The Smith family, and their slice of Los Angeles, refused to simply let David and Linda vanish without a trace. Mysterious signs and initial investigation. The first hours and days after the Smiths' disappearance felt to those involved like walking blindfolded into a bewildering maze. The initial search yielded little more than the echo of familiar routines abruptly halted, and a creeping awareness that nothing was as it seemed. What followed was an intricate, often frustrating mesh of investigation, methods that were by the book intertwined with hunches and emotional guesses, as neighbors, family, and police all wrestled with mounting uncertainty. As detectives entered the Smith residence for a second, more thorough sweep, they moved beyond the casual observations of an untouched breakfast table and sleeping dog. This time, they cataloged every detail: the brand of Linda's reading glasses left on the sunroom table, the slight scuff marks on the back door's threshold, the crossword puzzle on the kitchen counter unfinished. All travel documents remained tucked away in their filing cabinet: passports, state ID cards, and Linda's meticulously labeled envelopes of property paperwork, their wallets, cash, and credit cards in their regular spots. Worst of all, nothing was missing that might hint at an impulsive escape or planned departure. The Smiths, it seemed, had vanished in a whisper. Detectives initiated interviews with neighbors, their approach measured but persistent. Most residents described the Smiths as predictably ordinary, friendly, conscientious, prudent to a fault about their home security, and not given to sudden decisions. The mail carrier recollected that neither David nor Linda had collected mail the morning after their disappearance. The Smiths' usual dog walker confirmed that the golden retriever hadn't been out since March 5th. Video from a doorbell cam across the street showed nothing unusual. Linda had waved goodbye to a neighbor around 7 a.m., and after that, the camera's field of view revealed only the unhurried movement of cars and dog walkers. The absence of digital footprints proved both reassuring and confounding. The couple's cell phones, found charging in their bedroom, showed no calls or texts after the evening of March 5th. Their laptops were intact, last in use for ordering groceries and checking emails about a local theater production. Police traced credit card purchases. The most recent were from a grocery store and a hardware store 2 days before they vanished. Security camera footage from the businesses confirmed David and Linda had shopped together, ordinary as ever, no sign of agitation or a hidden agenda. Their bank accounts showed regular activity, mortgage payments, utility bills, and deposits from property rental income, but nothing suspicious or out of sequence in the weeks leading up to March 6th. With identity theft and voluntary disappearance beginning to look unlikely, detectives began to explore the prospect of foul play. They dusted for latent fingerprints throughout the house, swabbed surfaces for DNA, and pored over security camera footage from garages and intersections in a several-block radius. Nothing showed strangers entering or leaving. The Smiths' alarm system logs demonstrated that no breach had occurred between the hours of 10 p.m. on March 5th and 8 a.m. on March 6th, a window when presumably nothing happened. Mark and Kevin, grappling with the invasion of procedural scrutiny, provided access to family emails, group chats, and even personal journals in a desperate attempt to rule out any hidden motives or distress signals. Detectives asked about recent arguments, family troubles, or money woes. Both sons faltered under the pressure but insisted. Their parents might have disagreed at times on minor issues or worried about Kevin's career, yet never anything that could suggest a full break or the type of decisive action disappearing would demand. When pressed, neighbors could recall no animosity in the Smiths' interactions, not with their sons, nor between each other. No reports of marital disputes, domestic violence, or simmering tension seemed to exist. Still, under the surface, rumors began to swirl within the community. Some pointed to Kevin's sometimes aloof behavior and sporadic unemployment, gossip that police dutifully logged but initially dismissed, focusing their attention instead on outside threats. The uncertainty and eerie calm left police restless. They canvassed the neighborhood for any minor disturbance, an unfamiliar car, a stranger loitering, missing packages, strange noises in the night. Tips trickled in, most fruitless. A supposed sighting of Linda at a distant coffee shop, a mysterious van parked for hours 2 blocks away, an elderly couple loosely matching the Smiths' description walking on a promenade near the Pacific. None could be verified. All fizzled out. In the meantime, the Smiths' home began to attract visitors. Friends bearing casseroles, reporters with cameras, and volunteers distributing missing person flyers with the couple's faces beaming in happier times. With no physical evidence of a crime, but no proof of voluntary absence, investigators found themselves stuck in limbo. A detective lieutenant described it to reporters as a chess game with half the pieces missing. Quietly, though, a smaller subset of officers started to look inward. If strangers weren't responsible, could the answer be somewhere closer, even within the Smith family circle? As the days wore on, early hope faded and suspicion, though faint, began to drift toward the only immediate family left behind. Small inconsistencies in Kevin's statements, little slips about timeline and incongruously relaxed demeanor, were cataloged for future review, but nothing substantive surfaced to break the deadlock. The mystery had begun to sprawl, as seemingly flawless as those meticulously manicured lawns, covering secrets that Los Angeles sunshine could not quite dispel. Family discord and buried tensions, a deepening mystery. As the days passed without any sign of David and Linda Smith, the focus of the investigation, almost inevitably, began to shift. With every conventional avenue of inquiry seemingly exhausted, whispers of family discord and hidden tension, which had formerly been only speculative, slowly began to command center stage in the investigation. Detectives, drawing both from standard police procedure and the time-tested intuition fostered by years on the job, found themselves compelled to look inward, toward the people closest to the missing couple. The Smith family facade, long admired by neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, suddenly seemed not quite as seamless as it appeared from the outside. The idea that internal strife could lie at the heart of this case was not easily accepted, either by the community or the brothers themselves. Mark and Kevin were externally perhaps the very image of sibling solidarity in a crisis. They called press conferences together, they grieved in tandem, and when asked by investigating officers about their parents' marriage or home life, they insisted that the Smith household was a place of affection, mutual respect, and routine minor quarrels. Yet, as the investigation deepened, the seams began to show. Even in those early interviews, officers noted subtle differences in recollection, body language that hinted at something unshared, a flicker of guardedness that couldn't fully be explained by the strain of waiting for news. The police perspective, building psychological profiles. Detectives began requesting more details about the Smiths' family life, not just the recent days but the past several years. Linda's closest friends were quietly summoned to share what they knew about family dinners and get-togethers, while Mark and Kevin endured increasingly pointed questioning about the brothers' relationships. Patterns began to emerge. As much as Mark tried to present the Smiths as a cohesive unit, interviews revealed that the family dynamic had always been weighted, with expectations falling unevenly across the two sons. Family friends described Mark as the classic firstborn, diligent, achievement-oriented, confident, and perhaps a touch rigid. He thrived on structure and was known to worry about his younger brother, whose career path and lifestyle often diverged from the family's unspoken script. Kevin, meanwhile, was more sensitive, sometimes sullen or withdrawn. His aptitude for creativity and desire for autonomy had led to friction, especially with his father, who valued security and clear goals. Through a string of interviews, minor anecdotes turned into a subtle tapestry of slights, misunderstandings, and the kind of accumulated resentment that festers quietly over years, rarely voiced except behind closed doors. Whisper networks and amplified suspicions. It didn't take long for the neighborhood grapevine to take notice. Even as neighbors organized search parties and circulated flyers, a parallel stream of speculation began to weave its way through coffee shops, after-school pickups, and the aisles of the local supermarket. People who had once attended Smith family barbecues found themselves replaying old interactions, a sharp look exchanged over a dinner table, the way Kevin sometimes left early from holiday gatherings, or the way Mark seemed almost overly solicitous around his parents. Those memories, colored by hindsight and magnified by fear, contributed to the slow trickle of rumors that reached both police and local journalists. Tips began to filter in about raised voices heard on summer evenings, about doors slammed and episodes when Kevin disappeared for weeks at a time, returning only at Linda's gentle urging. Old friends of the family came forward, their statements a careful mix of loyalty and candor. Some described David Smith as a man proud of his sons but never hesitant to express disappointment, while others recalled Linda as the quiet peacekeeper, her attempts to mend rifts sometimes bordering on denial. Forensic paths and digital footprints. With the domestic angle rising in importance, police analysts doubled down on their scrutiny of family communications. Texts and emails once dismissed as routine received new attention. Detectives parsed disagreements about holiday plans, snarky jokes that crossed into snide, and one or two sharp email exchanges between Kevin and his father over finances. The kinds of words families usually forget but which, in the shadow of a disappearance, take on sinister meaning. Meanwhile, a forensic accounting team was tasked with tracing every dollar that moved between family members over the past year. Contrary to what some had feared, no large or suspicious withdrawals appeared. The Smith finances, at least on paper, mirrored the ordinary jostling and lending that takes place among closely knit families, yet there were notes in Linda's personal diary that alluded to stress at home, Mark's rigidity, and Kevin's struggle to find his place. Those lines, vague as they might have seemed before, now demanded attention, psychological ripples, and fractured trust. As the days dragged on without meaningful developments in the case, Mark's and Kevin's behavior came under increasingly close scrutiny. Not just by law enforcement, but by those around them. Mark, who had initially thrown himself into the search with single-minded determination, began displaying signs of exhaustion and defensiveness, withdrawing from reporters and limiting his public statements. Kevin's oscillation between visible agitation and odd moments of apparent nonchalance only deepened community suspicion. Every action was catalogued. Was Kevin trying too hard to behave normally? Did Mark protest his brother's innocence just a bit too much? These observations did not go unnoticed by seasoned detectives. Family dynamics, once merely background noise in a missing persons case, were now at the forefront. The undercurrents of unspoken competition, of wounds never quite healed or acknowledged, became an integral part of the case files. In a city like Los Angeles, where image often takes precedence over substance, the private, invisible fractures of even the most promising families could swiftly become threads for investigators to follow. For the Smiths, and for the city that watched their tragedy unfold, the suspicion that the roots of the mystery might be found not among strangers, but within the tangled web of old resentments and hidden fractures, was a reality both deeply uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. The truth gradually emerges through strange manifestations. As the days turned into weeks, the search for the Smiths began to feel less like a community rallying around a lost couple, and more like a collective holding of breath, waiting for some truth to surface from the cracks in the family's veneer. The official investigation pressed on, but it was the strange undercurrents of human behavior, those unguarded moments, odd phrases, and silent glances that began to speak the loudest. Among all those involved, it was Kevin Smith whose conduct subtly, and then blatantly, set itself apart. At first, his oddness was easy to dismiss. Friends excused his apparent nonchalance as shock, and neighbors rationalized his jokes and half-hearted shrugs as the facade of a man unwilling to confront grief. But gradually, people noticed patterns that were impossible to ignore. During community vigils, Kevin sometimes lingered on the edge of the candle-lit crowd, his attention wandering even during solemn prayers. He obliged local television interviews but often spoke in tangents, focusing on the strangeness of the media circus, or opining about news anchors, rather than pleading for his parents' return. His smile, when it appeared, was described as offbeat or ill-timed. He once quipped about family drama during a press conference, eliciting awkward silences instead of empathy. He also seemed keenly interested in how the investigation was proceeding, sometimes visiting the police station not with new information but to ask about details. Which leads were being followed? Were any suspects being considered? Had police checked the family trust and property records? Officers initially chalked this up to legitimate anxiety, but the frequency and tone of his inquiries took on a peculiar urgency. Detective Vasquez, who led the missing persons unit, noted in his casebook, "Kevin acts less like a desperate son and more like a nervous observer at a chess match." Friends began to share their reservations with one another. Natalie, a childhood friend of both Mark and Kevin, recounted private conversations where Kevin seemed to dwell on the idea of disappearing, or fantasize aloud about what life would be like without the constraints of family expectations. Once, at a small gathering after a search party returned empty-handed, Kevin mused about how, "No one really knows what goes on inside these houses," his voice tinged with sarcasm. These comments, odd at the time, began to echo with more weight as suspicion grew. Mark, meanwhile, became increasingly withdrawn. He fielded more of the media appearances and remained the primary contact for law enforcement, but he bristled when asked about Kevin's behavior. When pressed by both police and trusted friends, Mark defended his brother with increasing sharpness, insisting the two of them had grieved differently since childhood. Kevin was always the artist, the one who saw the world sideways, he told detectives in a closed interview, his own voice laced with defeat. "That doesn't mean he had anything to do with this. He can't process things like I do." Still, Mark's private worries began to seep through, and his frustration manifested in tense exchanges and missed calls between the brothers. The broader community, having gossiped their way through every conceivable theory, now watched the brothers for clues, sometimes with open curiosity, often with discomfort. At the weekly neighborhood watch meeting, a longtime neighbor hesitantly described seeing Kevin outside the Smith house late at night after his parents' disappearance, standing motionless for nearly an hour in the driveway, staring at the locked front door. Others reported overhearing Kevin talking to himself, rehearsing what sounded like explanations or apologies, though none could recall the words exactly. Several people remarked on the absence of visible grief. No tears, no public breakdown, just an uncanny stillness punctuated by brief flashes of anger or irritation when he felt misunderstood. The mounting psychological strain also seemed to spill out online. In posts on social media, Kevin alternated between sharing old family photos and blunt commentary about how people could never really understand what went wrong behind closed doors. He rebuffed or ignored messages of sympathy, often responding with dark humor. Rumors swelled in virtual spaces as internet sleuths analyzed his behavior, parsing every word and emoji for hidden admissions. Detectives took notice of these anomalies. Focusing on a blend of classic police work and the new realities of social media surveillance, they quietly obtained access to Kevin's online activities. Review of his private messages revealed a pattern: increasingly erratic conversations with a close-knit group of gaming friends, sometimes discussing dark family secrets or hinting at escape fantasies. In one chat, a friend probed Kevin about the case. Kevin's response was jokingly cryptic but unsettling. "Maybe they just needed a break from all of us. Or maybe I did it and this is my origin story." It was hard to tell if this was gallows humor or something worse. As days passed and each new interview, phone record, or home surveillance review failed to turn up physical evidence, investigators grew convinced that answers might lie not in what was present, but in what was absent. Kevin, for all his apparent nonchalance, could not mask certain tells forever. He was observed revisiting specific places from his childhood, his old elementary school, a bridge over a dried-up creek, the concrete remains of a skate park, sometimes leaving flowers or sitting for hours alone. Detectives began to wonder whether these visits marked sentimental mourning, Or perhaps unspoken confessions. Tension in the Smith family's inner circle continued to escalate. Mark, urged by some family friends, attempted to confront Kevin directly about his behavior. The resulting conversation, overheard by a neighbor through thin apartment walls, was described as painful, a lot of raised voices but mostly just sadness. No accusations were directly stated, but the silence that followed seemed more telling than the words exchanged. It was as if the weight of what had and had not been spoken was now heaviest upon them both. The investigation, armed with these collective observations and the compilation of behavioral oddities, finally reached a crossroads. It wasn't just about the missing evidence. It was about the mosaic of human reaction to trauma, guilt, and the secrets families keep. Kevin's ability to stand out, not simply as a grieving son but as a person adrift in his own contradictions, had inadvertently drawn a new sharper circle of suspicion around him. The truth, the community realized, might not emerge from a clue as clean as a fingerprint or a stray receipt, but from the small, cumulative weight of strangeness that had come day by day to define his presence, and the haunting absence of his parents. Clues from social relationships. As the investigation grew more desperate, law enforcement began to widen their focus beyond the confines of the Smith household. In a bustling city like Los Angeles, no one truly exists in a vacuum, and detectives knew that often the greatest insights come not from within the immediate family, but from those orbiting at its edges. Friends, colleagues, online companions, neighbors, the social ties that once wove the Smiths into the fabric of their community had now become the investigative threads, each waiting to be pulled in hopes of unraveling the larger mystery. Detectives started by reaching out to those who had close and ongoing relationships with David and Linda, but quickly realized that the most significant insights might come from people within Kevin's circle. Mark, ever the picture of stability, offered little beyond what the authorities already knew. He provided contact information for family friends and acted as a reliable liaison. Kevin, on the other hand, had drifted into more unconventional relationships. Social investigators delved into the group chats, direct messages, and even online gaming networks that made up a significant portion of his daily connections. It became clear that Kevin's social existence was somewhat fragmented. There was the family, the few remaining high school friends, a handful of fellow artists from the city's indie scene, and most compellingly, a close-knit group of online friends he'd met through gaming platforms and virtual creative meetups. These digital ties, while remote, ran deep. Through interviews and consented access to private conversations, some voluntarily turned over by concerned friends, investigators discovered a consistent undercurrent of tension and volatility, particularly in Kevin's perspectives on family and self-worth. One confidant, Natalie, who had known both brothers since childhood, described a gradual but emphatic transformation in Kevin's demeanor over the last couple of years. Initially, he was the easygoing, wisecracking artist at parties, always slightly at odds with Mark but part of the sibling unit. She recounted, however, that recent conversations were marked by a kind of fatalism. Kevin seemed both deeply resentful and resigned to his outsider status in the family. He would complain bitterly about his parents' inability to appreciate his creative aspirations, and confided in her that he felt permanently cast in the role of black sheep, a burden he grew to resent as it fused with his sense of adult inadequacy. Natalie also shared that Kevin made several dark, offhand comments about the suffocating nature of family expectations. He questioned out loud whether families truly wanted what was best for their children, or merely sought to mold them into extensions of unfulfilled parental dreams. Sometimes these reflections slipped into more disturbing territory, fantasies about running away for good, or the assertion that some families should just split for everyone's sake. While she initially dismissed them as frustration venting, context lent new gravity to these remarks after the disappearance. Beyond in-person and phone interviews, detectives carefully analyzed the web of digital footprints left by the Smiths and their extended social connections. The family's email threads painted a picture of surface-level cooperation, birthday reminders, holiday logistics, notes on property maintenance. Yet, in Kevin's separate online exchanges, particularly with his gaming friends and an enigmatic confidant named Alex, the tone shifted dramatically. Here he expressed envy of Mark's seemingly effortless successes, frustration with being unable to meet his father's standards, and an overwhelming sense of alienation. These feelings, deeply personal, became ammunition in private chats, sometimes veiled as self-deprecating humor, other times raw confessions. Alex emerged as a particularly influential figure. A self-identified survivor of family trauma, Alex often invited Kevin to share his deeper grievances. Their conversations, often taking place late into the night, suggested a shared worldview steeped in cynicism and mutual resentment of traditional family dynamics. In several alarming exchanges, Alex appeared to validate Kevin's darkest impulses, sometimes stoking indignation and questioning why Kevin should continue to subject himself to his parents' perceived emotional manipulation. These virtual dialogues, while sometimes couched in irony or dark banter, reflected a sense of solidarity that functioned as both catharsis and, at times, a dangerous echo chamber. Among co-workers at Kevin's part-time gigs, the portrait that emerged was equally troubled. Some described him as talented but unpredictable, swinging between bursts of creative brilliance and periods of profound disengagement. One supervisor, who managed Kevin at a local gallery, remembered a heated argument after Kevin felt slighted during a group show. He'd exploded with words like, "Nobody ever listens to me, not here, not at home." Others remembered him vanishing for days, occasionally sending rambling texts about needing to get away, though he never explained from what or from whom. These inconsistencies, it turned out, mirrored older patterns friends had seen: sensitivity to perceived rejection, and a tendency to externalize blame during personal setbacks. Meanwhile, Mark's friends and business contacts, when asked about his relationship with Kevin, echoed the narrative of a family divided. Mark was universally respected, but some described tension when Kevin was present: awkward jokes, one-upmanship, and the careful silence that sometimes fell when the conversation risked treading on sensitive family territory. One financial colleague recalled Mark leaving a client lunch early, visibly perturbed after receiving a series of texts from Kevin. When pressed, Mark muttered something about family dramas he could never fix, before brushing off the inquiry. Neighborhood testimonies added yet another dimension to the investigation. Some recalled seeing Kevin pacing the block alone, often late at night, after his parents vanished. He appeared lost in thought, sometimes stopping to stare at his childhood home or sitting on a curb scribbling in a small notebook. Local parents noted that he avoided eye contact and rebuffed offers of help, mumbling vague thanks or changing the subject altogether. One couple, whose son grew up playing Little League with Kevin, shared that in the weeks prior to the disappearance, he had become withdrawn, even hostile, when the topic of family came up during a backyard barbecue. "It's all just an act," he had said cryptically, staring into the fire pit. "Families don't work like you think." Through all these conversations, the investigative team compiled a shifting mosaic of strained bonds and subtle warning signs. They mapped Kevin's connections, virtual and physical, cross-referencing timelines with every message, sighting, and anecdote. The analysis revealed a steady escalation. Kevin's social world, rather than acting as a lifeline, had become a sounding board for bitterness. His friends, while supportive, unwittingly became audience to grievances that had grown far past the ordinary pains of adulthood. In hindsight, more than one acquaintance wondered aloud if they had missed warnings, or failed to reach out at a decisive moment. Perhaps most telling was the contrast between Kevin's increasing withdrawal from his physical community and his dependency on digital connections. Whereas Mark became the face of the family's public call for help, organizing search parties, giving interviews, maintaining composure, Kevin retreated to the relative anonymity of group chats, online forums, and the comforting distance of a screen. Detectives observed that, though he continued to interact with his core group of online friends, his messages grew darker and more insular in the aftermath of the disappearance. He became prone to long, late-night rants peppered with fatalism and self-pity, interrupted by bursts of gallows humor, sometimes alluding arguably to a reality too painful to face directly. Across all these layers of social connection, an insidious pattern emerged. Kevin's inability to authentically confide in those closest to him, his parents, his brother, his in-person friends, left his grievances to fester unchecked in isolated, sometimes toxic digital spaces. Law enforcement came to realize that the most revealing clues would not be found in a single angry message or tearful confession, but in the accumulated residue of all these fractured communications. Ultimately, the evidence from Kevin's web of social relationships painted a sobering picture. The support networks meant to catch someone in crisis, family, friends, co-workers, were either strained by years of misunderstanding or circumvented in favor of virtual companionship that, rather than healing, only deepened his sense of disconnection. As detectives pressed onward, it became clear that the fragmentation and feedback loops of Kevin's social life did not just foreshadow unraveling, they were in fact an integral cause. Breakthrough investigation and psychological turning point. Breakthroughs in complex investigations rarely arrive as single moments of inspiration. Instead, they often emerge from the grinding accumulation of small insights, each contributing its weight to the eventual tipping point. In the Smith disappearance, this hoped-for turning point began quietly, with detectives combing through volumes of digital evidence, transcripts, and psychological assessments, piecing together the fragments of daily life that most people take for granted. The pressure had mounted, both from inside the Los Angeles Police Department and from a public whose anxiety had reached a fever pitch. The first stirrings of a breakthrough came as a result of persistent digital forensics work. One detective, Officer Rachel Min, noticed peculiar patterns in Kevin Smith's digital communications, especially in his late-night chats on gaming platforms. He appeared more candid in those anonymous, far-flung spaces than anywhere else, dropping asides about just wanting to disappear and envious barbs targeted at his brother Mark. At first, these remarks read like vented frustration, common enough online, but as officers dug deeper, they identified recurring themes: bitterness, isolation, and hints of a dark yearning for both escape and validation. Detective Min partnered with LAPD's psychological profiling team to interpret these exchanges. Using advanced sentiment analysis tools, they parsed thousands of chat messages and private emails, looking for markers of escalating distress or plans beyond venting. It was painstaking work. Patterns slowly emerged. Kevin's darker missives correlated precisely with key family events. Mark's new promotion, a recent holiday gathering, even the silent house after a family argument. The language of victimhood began to shift towards something potentially far more dangerous. Hints of premeditation, and at times references so cryptic they bordered on confession. The technological effort ran parallel to boots-on-the-ground police work. Detectives revisited their interviews with Kevin's circle, pushing harder on inconsistencies. Friends, previously protective, now revealed new doubts. Several online contacts who'd previously brushed off concerns returned to detectives with screen-captured confessions and odd jokes, statements that, in the fog of disappearance, loomed with ominous possibility. A gamer friend from Oregon produced a chilling exchange. Kevin, in a bout of what seemed like self-pity, wrote, "I could make all this go away if I had the nerve, maybe then someone would notice me for real." His contact, only partially understanding, replied with nervous emojis, but the sentiment was logged and reviewed by the investigative team for follow-up. Detectives held a tense case conference, reviewing both the circumstantial oddities and the dangerous potential of a suspect hiding in plain sight. The lead investigator, Lieutenant Denise Harper, outlined the need for a new approach. "We have pieces. Now we need the trigger, the one thing that will make him crack or else reveal where the dam breaks." Unbeknownst to Kevin, the LAPD had begun covert monitoring. Under the legal limits of a missing persons investigation, his online and phone activities were surveilled, and his physical movements lightly tailed. Detectives watched as his insomnia worsened. He made erratic drives late at night, sometimes toward the city's gritty industrial West End, but never the same route twice. Surveillance teams noted he never lingered long nor met anyone, yet his patterns became ritualistic, almost compulsive. During one such drive, monitored in tandem with cell phone geolocation logs, Kevin made a detour to a storage rental facility. There he entered with a backpack and exited nearly an hour later, visibly agitated, hands trembling. Investigators quickly obtained a warrant and, searching the rented unit, discovered carefully boxed items belonging to his parents. Family albums, childhood keepsakes, and a number of sealed containers labeled in Linda Smith's familiar handwriting. With mounting dread, investigators cataloged the evidence and sent forensic teams to examine the contents. Each box yielded yet more proof of the Smiths' daily patterns, but then, at the back, they found an unfamiliar metal lockbox. Inside was a spiral notebook, written in Kevin's cramped, erratic script. The notebook contained a mixture of angst, creative tangents, and what appeared to be practice letters, never sent, addressed both to Mark and to the parents. Toward the end, the entries grew dark, sometimes incoherent, with sketches of crime scenes and maps of the neighborhood. One chilling section contained a step-by-step outline, alibis, potential getaway scenarios, and rationalizations for resetting his life. The emotional tone careened from nostalgia to rage, heartbreak to icy calculation. Armed with this new material, the detective's theory that Kevin's actions weren't mere products of distress but suggested forethought became alarmingly plausible. Forensic psychologists were consulted to cross-analyze the writings with his digital communications, noting not only a consistency in style, but in the escalation of intent over time. The digital and analog breadcrumbs began converging. Meanwhile, surveillance teams watched Kevin's physical behavior grow more unpredictable. He was seen standing, unmoving, in front of his parents' old home at dawn, then disappearing into the city for hours, returning disheveled and silent. The psychological stress on Kevin was becoming apparent, a fracture between his outward demeanor and internal turmoil. Neighbors noticed he spoke with increasing agitation, often to himself, sometimes gesturing wildly when he thought he was alone. Family acquaintances called police tip lines to describe late-night encounters where Kevin seemed distant or panicked, as if weighed down by a burden too heavy to bear alone. Psychologists interpreted these classic signs of mounting guilt and anxiety: insomnia, obsessive revisiting of the crime scene, growing fear of discovery, and a near-compulsive need to see what investigators knew or suspected. Every small cue, from his bitten nails to the wild, darting look in his eyes, was logged by detectives. But psychological unraveling alone, however suggestive, wasn't sufficient for a case breakthrough. Investigators knew that to move forward decisively, from suspicion to hard evidence, they'd need something undeniable and concrete. The pressure cooker was now set. Friends' testimonies, digital paper trails, the physical notebook, and Kevin's behavior all pointed to an imminent breaking point. The question was whether it would be enough to reveal the full truth before he could retreat further into denial or flight. The decisive psychological shift arrived during a carefully orchestrated police interview. With mounting circumstantial evidence, detectives called Kevin into the station for what was framed as a routine follow-up. In reality, they had prepared a full psychological profile and a detailed timeline matching his movements to gaps in the Smiths' timeline. Inside the bright, chilly interview room, Kevin sat across from Lieutenant Harper and Detective Min. The conversation opened with familiar ground, the hopes for a positive resolution, memories of his parents' kindness, gentle requests to recall details from the days leading up to the disappearance. As the officers gradually directed the questions toward inconsistencies, they watched for minute changes in Kevin's posture, vocal tone, and eye contact. Their approach was methodical, nurturing rapport, then introducing information that only the police and the true perpetrator could know. When presented with the recovered notebook, Kevin's hands shook. His initial bravado faltered, replaced by silence, then anger, accusations of police harassment, claims that the materials had been planted, attempts to shift focus back onto Mark. The officers pressed on, citing evidence from his digital conversations and pointing to matching emotional cues in the notebook and his recent public behavior. The room grew tense, Kevin's responses cycling between defiance and sudden quiet, tears welling and jaw set, until finally a moment of exhausted collapse arrived. He buried his face in his hands and, though not yet a confession, murmured, "You don't know what it was like. None of you ever will." That fractured admission marked the true psychological turning point investigators had awaited. Suddenly the threads they'd painstakingly gathered pulled taut. With that plea for understanding, Kevin cracked open the door to outright confession. Police redoubled efforts to corroborate details, revisiting unexamined security footage, re-interviewing witnesses along his late-night driving routes, and conducting additional forensic reviews of both the rented storage unit and the Smith home. Within days, heightened attention led to the discovery of further physical evidence, trace materials and DNA linking Kevin's movements to the isolated location where the Smiths were suspected to have met their tragic end. This, combined with his earlier statements and the spiral of digital despair, finally gave authorities the material leverage for formal charges. Friends and acquaintances, startled by the speed and clarity of the unraveling case, described the weeks as a surreal march from doubt to certainty. For Kevin, the psychological turning point was irreversible. During subsequent interrogations, this time accompanied by legal counsel, he alternated between guilt, rationalization, and periods of withdrawn silence, the burden of his actions evident in every gesture. Investigators prepared for a difficult trial, one where mental health, family dynamics, and meticulous investigative work would all become central. But for the search teams, the community, and the family's remaining members, that breakthrough marked the first true step toward painful clarity and perhaps eventual closure. Forensic crime scene investigation, chilling forensic evidence. The moment authorities gained access to the secret apartment in West Los Angeles, the air seemed to thicken with foreboding. The door was heavily reinforced, its modern lock system at odds with the building's aging exterior. Inside, an immediate chill suggested windows left perpetually shaded, shutting out the world. What struck the investigative team first was not chaos, but a precise, almost clinical order. Every object appeared arranged with calculated intent, as if each mundane household item was itself a cryptic clue. Kitchen counters were wiped down, but lying at their center were new, high-end chef's knives still gleaming from their packaging. An industrial meat tenderizer, clearly purchased recently, its stickers half peeled, rested beside a box of heavy-duty trash bags and rolls of clear plastic sheeting. The refrigerator, strangely empty save for bottled water and a container of strong chemical cleaner, sent an uncomfortable shudder through everyone present. On the table, an empty bottle of tranquilizers, a prescription recently filled in Linda Smith's name, suggested something sinister beyond medical need. As investigators spread through the apartment, they found layers of new, unused cleaning products and a stack of rubber gloves. In a back closet, black duffel bags with receipts attached indicated last-minute purchases. Mixed within the bags were receipts from area hardware stores and a late-night grocery market dated in the days immediately before the Smiths' disappearance. Despite the apartment's initial sterility, minute details betrayed frantic, late-night activity: stray bits of hair clinging to sink drains, smudges around door handles, and a single earring on the bathroom floor, quickly identified as matching a pair Linda was known to wear daily. In the living room, traces of tape marked out strange angular patterns on the hardwood floor, as if an impromptu work zone or containment field had been assembled and ripped away with haste. Blood evidence, at first nearly invisible beneath layers of hastily applied bleach and commercial cleaning agents, began to fluoresce under forensic blacklight, forming a chaotic constellation on floorboards and along the lower wall. The pattern and the droplet-size analysis painted a grim tableau, suggesting a violent struggle and a frantic effort to erase any trace. The bathroom yielded the most critical findings. Towels were missing, but the faint outline of where they'd hung remained on the wall. Residue from cleaning sprays and diluted sodium hypochlorite was so strong it stung investigators' eyes. Hidden in the plumbing trap beneath the sink, crime scene technicians extracted a gold wedding band, engraved with David Smith's initials, and traces of tissue later identified as human, a partial DNA match to both missing family members. The bathtub's drain, when dismantled, revealed remnants of blonde hair and a single disturbing tooth fragment. It was clear to the forensic team that considerable effort had been expended to dispose of biological evidence, likely with knowledge gleaned from true crime TV or online forums. Despite best efforts to sanitize the crime scene, tiny droplets of blood had seeped into cracks in the tile and porous grout. Using luminol, a wave of blue fluorescence illuminated bloody footprints that mapped the movement and operations within the apartment, footprints inconsistent with the size or pattern of either David or Linda Smith's shoes, pointing toward another, smaller-footed individual, determined later to fit Kevin Smith. On the apartment's small balcony, a plastic tarp was found bundled under a pile of garden supplies. When unrolled, it revealed stains and latent prints, indicating it had been pressed into service as a makeshift containment sheet. Forensic experts noted traces of soil and grass embedded in the tarp, inconsistent with the urban landscape, suggesting a secondary disposal site or an attempt to transport remains elsewhere. The fireplace, rarely used in Los Angeles, had a faint ashy residue unlike that produced by wood. Chemical analysis later confirmed partial remains and bone fragments, with trace elements matching dental crowns belonging to one of the missing Smiths. The most chilling evidence was unearthed from the apartment's locked storage unit in the basement. It contained 2 battered sealed bins lined with industrial-grade garbage bags. Forensic anthropologists, with painstaking care and respect, identified within the bins partial skeletal remains. Tests on fibers and traces of compressed soil in the bins offered proof that the remains had been temporarily stored, then shifted. Alongside these, police found shredded pieces of clothing, fragments of Linda's favorite cardigan and David's personalized handkerchief. Piecing together the timeline from surveillance footage, store receipts, and cell tower records, detectives reconstructed Kevin's activities in excruciating detail. On the eve of the disappearance, his phone pinged repeatedly along a route between the family home and the storage site, with credit card charges for cleaning supplies, garbage bags, and gasoline appearing mere hours apart. This digital trail, when cross-referenced with the physical horror discovered inside the apartment, erased any lingering doubts. This was not a random act or a crime of passion, but an orchestrated effort involving logistical planning and a chilling emotional detachment. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. Not only did it prove that a grisly crime had occurred, but it also cemented the chilling reality of the Smiths' fate. Each detail, from the deliberate purchase of murder implements to the botched acts of concealment, laid bare a mind spiraling into darkness. For the investigative team, these discoveries marked both the end of a desperate search for answers and the beginning of an equally harrowing quest for justice within the echoing brutality of the crime scene. The apartment, with its ghostly order and shattering secrets, became both mausoleum and witness to the unraveling of an American family. Confession and trial in the American court. From the moment the police gathered overwhelming forensic evidence, a mounting sense of inevitability swept through all involved. From the Smith family's devastated inner circle to the city's stunned citizenry and the detectives who had lived with the case for months. Kevin Smith, whose erratic behaviors and digital footprints had long painted him as a person of interest, was soon brought in for intensive marathon questioning. Kevin initially maintained his innocence, asserting that his behavior was a coping mechanism and that his digital conversations were merely dark humor, never intended as actual plans. However, the combined psychological pressure of evidence and skilled interrogation soon began to unravel his composure. Experienced homicide detectives, working alongside forensic psychologists, confronted him with damning details, purchasing patterns matching supply lists, mobile device pings overlapping crucial windows of time, and most disturbing, the grim DNA findings in the rental storage unit. Kevin's breathing would quicken, his answers grew unsteady. As the police interview stretched into its second day, Kevin's self-control eroded further. Detectives shifted strategy, leveraging not only the mounting scientific evidence, but snippets from Kevin's own chat logs, statements made to his confidant Alex that betrayed private resentment and premeditation. The conversations with Alex, once shrouded in the coded language of the internet, now stood out as chilling testimonials. At last, after hours of near silence, Kevin's veneer crumbled. With a halting voice he confessed. He had carried out the attack, spurred by years of internalized anger and a sense of emotional abandonment, and abetted psychologically if not in person, by the validation and egging on of Alex. He admitted to plotting for weeks and coldly described the steps he took to avoid detection, though he frequently broke down with remorse and disbelief over his actions. With the confession on record, and corroborated by physical and digital evidence, the Los Angeles District Attorney prepared for a highly publicized trial. The media frenzy was immediate. News vans surrounded the courthouse. Social commentators, legal analysts, and true crime enthusiasts debated motives and family dysfunction across every channel and streaming platform. For months, the Smith family case dominated headlines, fueling both public fascination and dread. The trial took place in Los Angeles Superior Court, a sprawling and high-security building that had seen its share of notorious episodes but few as psychologically wrenching as this one. From jury selection onward, the proceedings were fraught with emotion. The prosecution meticulously laid out a timeline, introducing receipts, surveillance footage, expert witness testimony, and the harrowing forensic finds from the hidden apartment. The devastated figure of Mark Smith, the surviving brother, returned day after day to testify and bear witness in the gallery, joined by extended family and friends. Kevin's defense, publicly appointed but well-respected, did not contest the facts, focusing instead on establishing a narrative of untreated mental health struggles, profound alienation, and coercion by Alex. Mental health experts took the stand, describing Kevin's years of depression and the toxic dynamic with his online confidant. The defense team sought to humanize Kevin for the jury, painting his actions as the desperate act of a man pushed to the brink by a lifetime of silent suffering and digital manipulation, rather than a cold-blooded sociopath. Still, the prosecution countered with the chilling thoroughness of the plan and the brutality of the aftermath, arguing for premeditation and the sanctity of the victims. Inside the courtroom, raw emotion hung heavy in the air. Jurors flinched at autopsy descriptions and forensic video. Several struggled to hold back tears during Mark's testimony, and others excused themselves during particularly graphic evidence presentations, an action noted with compassion by the presiding judge. Alex, the internet accomplice, became a focal point of both legal and psychological scrutiny. He was summoned to testify via video link from another state, but invoked his Fifth Amendment right repeatedly. Legal analysts broke down the complex web of guilt, complicity, and the dark power of virtual relationships. Online communities, meanwhile, tore themselves apart in debate, many blaming digital culture, others fuming at the inadequacy of support for at-risk individuals. Real life and virtual worlds collided in a haze of speculation and outrage. The trial's closing arguments echoed long after the court recessed. The prosecution underscored the devastating intentionality. The defense, in one final plea, asked the jury to consider the cost of lifelong alienation and untreated trauma. After days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge, weighed down by the gravity of what the trial had revealed, not just about a shattered family, but about a society grappling with the intersection of mental health and the digital age, delivered a life sentence without parole. The sentence was met with a spectrum of emotions. Mark Smith sobbed quietly, others pressed hands to mouths, and even the bailiffs struggled to maintain professional detachment. The case set off a chain of public discourse on mental illness, online influence, the fault lines running through American families, and how the legal system might better respond to similar crises. For weeks, the Smith trial remained America's cautionary tale. The media, once so eager for spectacle, eventually grew quiet. The city of Los Angeles tried to return to normalcy, but for all who had witnessed the arc of confession and justice in the courtroom, the echoes of the Smith tragedy lingered, an urgent reminder of the stories that unfold behind closed doors and the darkness that sometimes escapes even the sunniest suburbs. Social consequences and humanitarian lessons. The Smith family tragedy did not end with the verdict in court. As the final gavel fell and Kevin was sentenced, waves of consequence rippled through the fabric of Los Angeles and well beyond, touching communities, institutions, and the national psyche in sadly enduring ways. This section explores both the immediate aftershocks and the longer-term human lessons, public, personal, and systemic, prompted by a crime almost unimaginable in its intimacy and its violence. Media frenzy and the crisis of spectacle. Within hours of the initial court proceedings, major networks and social media were ablaze with details of the case. Headlines blared not just the gruesomeness of the act, but also focused on what many decried as the failure of the American family. Talk radio, daytime TV, and countless podcasts hosted impassioned conversations, exploring the specifics of sibling rivalry, parental pressure, and the dangerous isolation of the digital age. For weeks it was impossible to browse news feeds without confronting think pieces and op-eds dissecting the Smith saga. Mark's steadfast but haunted face became a symbol, sometimes of resilience, other times of what society had lost. The very notion of privacy, online and offline, came under scrutiny. Did anyone see enough, know enough, or intervene soon enough to prevent the spiral? Community reckoning and social trust. The Smiths' own neighborhood, once celebrated for its sense of safety and tradition, wrestled with a collective sense of guilt. Town halls and PTA meetings filled with people searching for meaning, asking why warning signs hadn't prompted more urgent attention from friends, neighbors, and even local authorities. There were renewed campaigns advocating for community watch programs and mental health education, with parents pressing for better emotional intelligence curriculum in local schools. Flyers, initially designed for search parties, were quietly recycled as pamphlets warning about the dangers of silence and shame within the family unit. The pressure cooker of achievement culture. Perhaps the most searing debates played out over what the Smith tragedy revealed about intergenerational pressure and so-called achievement culture. Journalists and family therapists all weighed in. Was this an extreme outgrowth of the American obsession with success, where deviation from prescribed paths turned siblings into adversaries? National conversation swirled around whether high expectations sometimes suffocate rather than inspire. At town meetings, on podcasts, and in newspaper letters, everyday Americans shared their own stories about the silent costs of competition, unresolved resentments, and the brittle pride of outward perfection hiding internal fragility. Social media, amplifier and villain. The case forced a reckoning with the darker underbelly of social networks and digital communities. The role of online relationships, especially the toxic encouragement from Kevin's confidant Alex, became a cautionary tale. Lawmakers and advocacy groups called for better digital literacy, urging platforms to detect and respond more proactively to signs of real distress or conspiracy. The court of public opinion debated the blurry line between dark humor, online venting, and actionable threat, spawning documentaries and coverage on how the internet can both connect and destroy. Why didn't anyone close to Kevin see his distress, or did they dismiss it as mere melodrama? Became a haunting viral refrain. Policy reforms, health, law, and education. legislators soon found themselves under pressure to address cracks exposed by the Smith case. Mental health funding came up for debate in the California State House. Several cities considered pilot programs for anonymous counseling, stricter regulation of prescription medication, and protocols for identifying at-risk individuals before tragedy struck. Law enforcement agencies reviewed their missing person policies, including the use of social media and data analytics for early crisis intervention. Schools in Los Angeles added seminars on stress management, empathy, and conflict de-escalation to their student wellness initiatives, treating the Smith story not as anomaly, but warning. Personal aftermath, survivors, and stigma. Perhaps most poignant was the private devastation left in the wake of such public horror. Mark Smith, the last remaining member of his core family, became both a media figure and a private mourner. Though he received messages of support from around the country, he also encountered the heavy burden of stigma. Some looked at him with pity, others whispered doubts or suspicions, as if tragedy itself was contagious. Extended family withdrew from public events. Friends admitted to walking on eggshells, unsure whether to offer condolences or keep their distance. For Mark, grief became an exercise in navigating not only loss but the expectations society placed upon survivors of infamous suffering. Should he forgive, forget, or forever bear the mantle of public witness? Former neighbors of the Smiths experienced secondary trauma as well. Some sought counseling to process their sense of shock and helplessness. Others became hyper-vigilant in their own parenting or community watch, as if fear itself might help stave off the next disaster. The community's annual block parties and farmers' markets, once celebrations of suburban unity, grew quieter, tinged with awkwardness, and the knowledge that depravity could hide behind any well-tended hedge. Rethinking family, connection, and redemption. The Smith case prompted soul-searching about what it truly means to know someone, especially within a family. Discussion shifted from blame to prevention. How does a parent, a sibling, a friend spot the subtle signs of unraveling? Therapists and counselors reported increased interest in family mediation and communication workshops. Faith communities, shaken by the Smiths' downfall, took up themes of forgiveness, confession, and vigilance in their services. Local papers published interviews with psychologists on the dangers of secret keeping and the healing power of vulnerability. Some suggested that redemption, for survivors and community alike, required not just justice through punishment, but active efforts at collective empathy and reparation. National reflection. The limits and possibilities of healing. As months passed and headlines faded, the Smith family tragedy lingered as a stern warning and a call to action. Documentaries, books, and even educational curricula referenced the case as a turning point. Universities hosted panels on mental health, toxic family dynamics, and the need for early intervention. Survivors of similar tragedies reached out, forming networks of support and advocacy for those suffering in silence. Lawmakers reacted with a mix of sorrow and resolve. Bills were introduced in California and beyond to strengthen safety nets, require mental health training for law enforcement, and provide new avenues for anonymous community reporting. But perhaps the most lasting lesson was a profoundly human one. The only true bulwark against despair and violence is not invulnerability, but the willingness to see, listen, and intervene before resentment crystallizes into catastrophe. The Smith story became both cautionary tale and quiet plea for change. If even the perfect family can fall, then the best any community can do is keep its doors and its hearts a little more open. Every neighbor, teacher, and friend who resolved to check in more faithfully or offer a listening ear carried forward a piece of hard-earned wisdom. The greatest tragedy is always the one that might have been prevented by simple acts of care.